Hello, my name is Michael Moser. I'm a researcher at the University of Vermont Center for Rural Studies. We're located in the state of Vermont, which is located in the northeasternmost part of the United States. We're a very small state, and we have about 625,000 people that call our state home, which is very small population for a state, one of the smallest states in the country, as a matter of fact. And I am a researcher that I'm primarily concerned with population indicators, with population data. I work with the U.S. Statistical Bureaus, U.S. Census Bureaus, federal data sets, indicators about our communities and our states and the country. I regularly work with indicators like median household income, poverty rates, population, housing affordability, more traditional indicators that are produced regularly by our Census Bureau here in the United States. And in my role, I am often asked to collect data that may not be collected by the federal government here, to help organizations and municipalities answer questions that they might have that go beyond the existing data sets. And a couple of the indicators that I'd like to talk about today represent some interesting alternatives to some of the more traditional indicators of well-being. In 2012, the state of Vermont officially adopted use of the Genuine Progress Indicator in the state of Vermont. The Genuine Progress Indicator, or GPI as it's also known, is a tool that is designed to reflect a more accurate accounting of economic activity by taking into account economic activities that are detrimental and counting them as negatives, and as well as economic activities that are considered to be positive for a population and counting those as such. GPI is an alternative new measure that has been designed to address the faults of GDP, or gross domestic product, which has been the go-to economic indicator for decades now, at least in the United States. And GDP does not count detrimental or negative economic activities or externalities as negatives. And so GPI is really seeking to correct for that. So in 2012, the state of Vermont adopted GPI, and in 2016, we completed something called a Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy for our state. It's also known as CEDS, C-E-D-S. And our CEDS report looked at many different indicators for our populations across the state of Vermont. And one of those was a close look at the GPI and thoughtfulness around how our policies would have a appreciable or positive impact on our genuine progress in the state of Vermont. And so I believe this is unique for U.S. states in that we have both adopted GPI formally as an indicator for our state, and then we have applied use of that metric in our planning and development strategies for the state of Vermont. So that's an example of one sort of alternative indicator to get a more holistic picture of population well-being that we have applied here in our state. As a researcher at the Center for Rural Studies, I work with population indicators. I work with data that are derived from the Census Bureau, and I collect data on behalf of organizations, that are seeking to answer questions they may have. And I'm always looking for new indicators or new ways to describe our population, new ways to understand our populations here in the state. And in 2012, I was approached by an organization called Gross National Happiness USA, or GNH USA. And I was asked if I would be interested in collecting data about Vermont's happiness and well-being, the population's happiness and well-being across the state. And of course, I was interested in any new indicator or alternative indicator that might exist or we might be able to help exist in our state. And so we went ahead and did something that I believe is a first in the United States. We conducted a random sample of households across the state of Vermont and created a representative sample of a data set with a representative sample of these households so that we are able to measure respondents' happiness and well-being using an instrument that I'll talk about in a minute. And we can then apply those responses to our survey to the entire population as a whole. So we sampled somewhere in the vicinity of 600 households, and we can say that our results are representative to the overall population at a certain rate. The instrument that we used in order to gauge happiness and well-being of the Vermont population was borrowed from the Happiness Alliance organization, which is based out on the west coast of the United States. I believe it was originated right in Seattle, as a matter of fact, Seattle, Washington. And the Happiness Alliance Happiness and Well-Being Survey instrument is comprised of a bank of questions that have been tested by social scientists over the years to gauge happiness and well-being across a variety of domains. Domains that include physical health, mental health, social connectedness, environmental health, and other factors. So we applied that instrument here in the state of Vermont, collected data in 2012, and came up with a point in time of Vermonters' happiness. We were able to compare our results to results from a more national effort collecting data so that we could actually see Vermonters' well-being and happiness and compare that against U.S. citizens' happiness and well-being overall. And we were fortunate enough to be able to conduct that study again in 2017, and which lent itself to the development of what we would call a longitudinal data set, or 2 points of data over time, so that we could begin to track Vermonters' happiness and well-being over time to see if our happiness or well-being were increasing or decreasing. And so now in 2019, we are hoping to continue this research here in the state of Vermont. We would like to be able to compare Vermont to other states individually. We would like to perhaps look at different populations within the state of Vermont and see how their happiness and well-being compare to each other's. And we are very interested in continuing to collect these data over time. We have yet to implement utilization of our happiness and well-being research at the policy level. in any particular way, although because we have created a data set now that is longitudinal, that has 2 points of time and may have another point of time in the near future, um, there has been some interest from some policy folks here in the state of Vermont, not necessarily at the state governance level, but from among other organizations. There have been some hospitals that are interested in the well-being of populations that they serve. Um, and there are some municipalities that are interested in well-being at the very local level. We have the challenge of not having the kind of resources that are necessary to collect enough data to be able to make conclusions at the very local level. So at this time, we're only able to make conclusions about the state of Vermont overall. But again, we hope to increase our efforts and continue to collect data over time, and track Vermonters' happiness and well-being across these different metrics over time to see, you know, if we're progressing or not. And what's nice is that, as a researcher that's involved in population demographics and population indicators, I have data at my disposal now that, through the GPI and through the happiness and well-being research, we have data, we have alternative metrics that we can stand up next to some of the more traditional data that we have available about our communities, things like poverty rates and housing affordability and median household income. These are, you know, these are really good indicators, but my feeling is that the more indicators that we have and the more often we're able to stand up subjective indicators and objective indicators beside each other and see how they interact with each other over time and see how they shift and change over time, that's only going to improve our ability to understand how the policy decisions that we make can influence these factors. And it will serve to give us a more holistic understanding of our communities within the state of Vermont. And our hope is that, again, we'll be able to do this in more places across the country and be able to look at Vermont and compare Vermont to other places. And that will in turn help us to understand what works in our communities, which communities are the happiest and the most well off, on any of a range of indicators, where we can start to track that and look at that over time. It would be really great. So that's our research in a nutshell, and thank you very much.